Hey everyone, welcome to Moving Matt. We do all things cameras with a dash of vlogs and a little bit of travel. And today I was going to give you my impressions of the Sony A7S III after right about 6 months now. So I was coming from Canon. I'm actually shooting this on the Canon EOS R right now, so I feel like I have a slightly different perspective being a Canon shooter and moving over to Sony, or at least becoming a dual shooter with Sony. But to be honest, I haven't really shot too much with my EOS R since getting this camera. And I guess the reason is because I really love this camera. So most of the things I'm going to say about this are going to be fairly glowing. And then some of the things I'm going to talk about are just stuff that I do not like and things that I think that they can improve in their future cameras. Maybe they'll improve upon it in this up and coming A7 IV whenever that actually happens. So without further ado, let's get into it and start talking about this camera. Now, one of the things that I feel like I've noticed right away is all the thought that went into this camera and just the way it feels in the hand and just some of the small things that I really appreciate as a primarily video shooter at this point. One of the things that I really like is that this microphone jack right here, it allows you to open up your flip screen and not be impeded whatsoever when you have a wire hooked up to it. Just some of the things like that Sony has offered with this camera, I just think it's very well thought out, and it really seems like they've been listening to their customers, which gives me a lot of confidence moving forward in the future. When I buy and invest a lot into this system, it makes me feel like, okay, if they're listening to their customers with the little things, they're going to be listening to their customers with the big things as well. And so I feel like I can be very confident in the future of where Sony is going, and I want to be a part of it. So as you can tell, I'm not going into all the little details about this camera. I'm not going to talk about all the specs because there's a million different videos that you can find on that at this point. I'm just going to be talking about the things that stick out to me and my experience. Another thing I love about this camera and about Sony cameras in general when coming from Canon is all the different lens selection you have with their mirrorless bodies. So unless you want to use an adapter with the EOS R system, or I guess it would be the R system or RF mount system, you are fairly limited in your lens selection, especially if you're wanting to get something at a decent price. As with Sony, they open up their lens mount software to third party. And so pretty much every lens you get with this camera is going to be a native lens or work similar to a native lens. And you can get it for a fraction of the price by going with something like, for example, the Sigma over the G Master equivalent. Also, you have Tamron, which is really kicking butt with some very budget lenses. So you have a lot of selection when using Sony. Now, another big thing that I like, and one of the main reasons I actually came over to the Sony system, is they do dual recording on both card slots, at least when it comes to video. Now, recently they did do a firmware update with the Canon R6, and presumably it's going to be coming to the R5 as well, where they're going to be doing dual recording, and I think that's great, and that's a great step forward for Canon, but that option wasn't available when I was wanting to upgrade my camera. But just having these dual recording has given me a lot of peace when it comes to some of the projects that I've been working on. So I did a live event, a live showcase, and if you're doing like a concert or something like that, then having these dual cards really just has to be there, because somebody is not going to be able to redo a concert that maybe they've put in 6 months worth of work, and then they trust you to be the videographer and capture that moment for them. If I didn't have these dual cards, I probably would not even accept them as a client for that particular job, because I would feel a sense of responsibility that even if I knew that 99% of the time the card was not going to fail on me, that 1% would weigh me down so much that I would not want to go with it. So that was a big factor for me, and that brings me to the other reason I decided to go with the Sony, and that is that it really doesn't have any overheating issues to talk about. I live in a very hot climate, at least during the summer here in Tennessee. It's very humid, it's very hot most of the time. I've shot 4K 60 as long as I could possibly want outside and have not had any overheating issues whatsoever. Another thing that I've I've loved about this camera is the dynamic range in this camera. I love the way the footage looks. It just looks very professional. It looks very, you know, the overused term, cinematic, and it just looked like a camera that I could really grow into, because I'm not amazing filmmaker as of yet, and I hope to be one day. I just see a lot of people on YouTube that are way better than me. But one thing that I do want to do, and one thing that I have a passion for, is learning to be a better filmmaker so I can deliver better content for you, my clients, and myself. So I loved having this camera, knowing that I can take what I know now, and I also have a lot of room to grow. And the reason I talk about that, and this can kind of be a negative or a positive, and that is that this is a very complex beast. And that is one of the reasons I've waited so long to even give a real impressions of this camera, or give a, you know, a review of this camera. And that's because I really feel like I've just scratched the surface with this, and it's been kind of a hard time, or not a hard time, but a hard time to get out and shoot a lot out in the field, because I do have a 4-month-old. So that's been a little bit difficult to get the time that I would normally have with a camera to go out and shoot a lot. I've used this a lot in the studio, but still I just feel like there's so much more that I could learn from this camera. So just expect a long learning curve. But on the pro side is that you have a lot of customizable buttons, a lot of different things you can do in the menu. And like I said before, you can really grow into this camera. So I think this is going to be a great camera for a long time to come, and I would really hope so, because this is definitely not a cheap camera, and it was a hard decision for me to shell out that kind of money for a camera. But in the long run, I've been glad I did, and I'm sure I'm going to be glad I did even years down the road. And going along with the complexity and the amazing amount of choices with this camera, you have so many different video profiles that you can pick. You have S-Log 2 and 3, and Cine 1 through 4, HLG, you know, BTD, HBO, TNT, CBS. Sorry, none of the other ones, but you have a lot of different color profiles with this camera, and I think that is excellent for pretty much anybody to be able to have a lot of different choices. So moving on to some of the things that, you know, I really don't like, or it's kind of been slightly disappointing moving over to Sony, or at least you know, dual systeming it. I have not liked the cheap nature of this flip screen. The Canon EOS R has a much brighter, clearer, just higher quality screen as a whole. Also, I don't like the menus on the Sony A7S III. The menus are much better. Don't get me wrong, they're much better than older Sony cameras, but just not being able to navigate properly with the touch screen while you're recording, it just feels like some things work and some things don't, and it just feels a little odd and kind of forced, where with Canon, it's very simple. It's like, oh, I want to change my ISO, and I'll press a button, or I want to change whatever setting. I know that I can just pretty much touch the screen wherever, and I can choose that. And for this camera, you're gonna have to be using the dials and the menus a lot more than what you would need to with a Canon. If you're looking for more simplicity when it comes to actually using your camera, like I kind of said before, there is a big learning curve. So I will say that that is a downside to this camera, is that it's very complex when you're going to use it. So it's kind of a pro and a downside as well. The other big downside to this camera is that it is only 12 megapixels. And so when it comes to photography, it's not the best. It does the job, I feel like. So I do think that, you know, the images aren't bad. I still love the dynamic range in the photos as well. But overall, if you're buying this camera, I hope you're like 80% video or 70% video, then I would recommend this camera. But if photography matters equally for you, then maybe consider going with a different camera than this one. And if you're in the Sony system, maybe wait for the Sony A7 IV before jumping over to this camera. I think that that is, you know, one of the biggest, if not the biggest downside to this camera is the 12 megapixels. because also, even though it does 4K great, I do think that the future is going to be in high resolution like 8K, and I wonder about the future proofing of this camera. I'm wondering that in 2 or 3 or 4 years, will I want 8K, and will 8K now be the standard and I have a 4K camera and we'll have to upgrade. So even though I think with the feature set and with the different color profiles and just the learning of the camera, that this is a long-lasting camera, but when it comes to the capabilities of just having 4K, I wonder if that's going to be enough in 3 or 4 years. But to bring this thing into a landing, I do overall recommend this camera. I really do love this camera. And if you're into video and video is your primary thing, I definitely think that this camera may be for you. But those are just my thoughts. Drop in the comment section below and let me know, do you have this camera? What has your experience been with it? What are some of the things you like or do not like? Maybe we can help some people who may be on the fence to make an educated decision for themselves. And if you've liked this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up and consider subscribing. I recently saw that about 90% of you have not subscribed as of yet. And if you like this type of content, if you like what I've been doing here, consider subscribing. It really does help out the channel a lot. But until next time, peace.